Welcome, everybody. We are here with a special live stream tonight talking to the man who founded one of the pioneers of the non-distilling producer category, Trey Zoeller. Jefferson's Trey, welcome.
Thank you much. It's good to see you guys again. Been way too long.
I know. It's a cool 24 hours or something. Like, not even 24.
You want to do this every day, Trey? Just record?
Well, why not? I'm getting used to it.
So I want to say, first off, shout out to people in the chat. I see Taylor, Bear Stearns, Daniel K, Tim, Mr. Great Shot, Anthony Robert. I see a few more people kind of rolling in. So thank you all for joining. This is going to be a fun, little exciting time we're going to have here as we start diving into a Q&A. But before we do that, we do have something special that we're going to premiere and show. And so this is kind of going to set the scene a little bit, kind of give you some background into Trey starting Jefferson's and some of the, I guess you could say some of the, I don't want to say roadblocks, maybe some hurdles along the way, everything like that. And I think we'll dive into it a little bit more after it gets done. You all ready to kick off this video?
Let's do it.
All right. Let me go ahead and share this real quick. And then I'm going to take us off and then y'all enjoy this nice little 13 minutes without us.
I always say I don't want to create bourbon from a boardroom. You know, I've got a thirst for seeing what's around the next corner. I've had a saying since I've been 15 years old. I need the miles. And the bumpier the road, the steeper the climb, all the better. You know what? It's probably because Mother Nature it's the ultimate laboratory. That's where I like to be. That's where my workshop is. If I'm outside, I'm happy. Hey, what's going on? Oh, all good. All good.
6, take 1, marker.
Life is good. Oh, in the early days, we had a number of challenges, but the biggest issue we had then, nobody drank bourbon.
To go back to like starting the brand of Jefferson's to begin with, that's the least safe play you can make in American whiskey. The 1990s was a time of, if you went to a bank and you said, hey, I want to start a whiskey brand, they would have laughed you out of the room so fast because there was no money there. And the fact is, this industry is not very friendly to newcomers.
There were only 8 distilleries at the time, and bourbon was in a 30-year decline, so that made this ocean of bourbon available because they couldn't sell it. It was either being blended into a 4-year-old bourbon and not being showcased, or it was evaporating off until there was nothing left of it. So when I went knocking on the doors and talking to the different distilleries, they were more than happy to sell me as much bourbon as I wanted.
Trey came to us, a group of friends, and he said, I'm going to start a bourbon. Not only am I going to start a bourbon, but I'm going to start a premium bourbon. So we thought he was crazy, but we loved him and we wanted to support him, and that's what we all tried to do.
I think the key back when my dad and I started out is we were trying to make friends with bottles.
You've got to have someone who thinks about numbers, who thinks about protecting the business, and that's Chet. And then you got to have someone who is like the charismatic, out there, being different spokesperson. That's Trey.
I was 28 years old when we started. It was going out and just beating the streets. I was on the road a lot. I was meeting new distributors, opening up new distributors. I got to know people. I got to know what people liked, what they were looking for, what they connected to. It took a good 10 years before the tide really started to turn and people wanted bourbon. Those were some lean years. We did not sell much whiskey at all. That made it a lot more fun. It's like anything else. The more you have to struggle, the more you appreciate it.
Trey, good to see you.
The best part of the 25 years of Jefferson's, without a doubt, is doing it with my dad. Having that time together, to be able to travel where we have together and to be able to do it with him has been my wildest dream come true.
Oh man, there's some gems in this stuff right here.
Been a long time. Actually had hair back then.
What happened? So did I.
I haven't seen these in years.
Some of the first whiskey fests. You remember they used to stick us in the corner?
We were the stepchild.
Yeah, for sure.
We weren't exactly welcomed into the bourbon community with open arms.
Not at that time, right? I just quit my job. I had put everything into this and I couldn't sleep. That was some crazy stuff back then.
We were kind of short on funds at the time, but we had to scrape together to
go ahead and do
continue
that.
on.
Today, we've got 21 different expressions of Jefferson's bourbon. And still, Jefferson's Very Small Batch and Jefferson's Reserve are two of my favorite to craft because the success that we achieved by producing this quintessential, approachable bourbon that everyone can appreciate. That success gave me the confidence and credibility to reach out to different experts in different fields so I could collaborate with them and work together to push bourbons in different directions by grabbing Cabernet barrels from the Chapelet to make our Pritchard Hill cast finish, or rum barrels from Gosling's to make our rum cast finish, or different cognac barrels. It really allowed us to push the boundaries of what bourbon can be. So we went down to Costa Rica for a number of our 40th birthdays. We went down there to surf, catch some fish. We were having a blast. At the end of the day, every night on the bow of the ship, we started drinking bourbon. That ship's rocking back and forth, and it's rocking that bourbon back and forth in the glass. And that's when I thought, if this is happening in the bottle, it certainly would happen in a barrel. And if it would happen in a barrel, it's going to force maturation. So I suggested, why don't we put some barrels on the ship? So as these barrels travel, they zigzag the globe. So you're crossing the equator, you're getting all types of different weather fluctuations, temperature changes. The sun's beating down on those barrels. They're getting rained upon, snowed upon. They're hitting named storms all the time. They hit dead seas. You're getting all this influence that you couldn't possibly get inside of a warehouse like we are right now. After 3.5 years, we headed down to Key West to taste the barrels. I've never had it before. I've got 3 journalists with me. I'm hoping it's good, but I don't know.
I thought Trey was absolutely crazy for doing Ocean at first. They sent me a little sample, and I think I still have it. I don't know where it is, but they sent it to me, and it was like damn near black. And I think I called Trey up, and I was like, did you guys leave a nail in this whiskey or something?
So we tap in, and it comes out black, and it comes out thick. And I'm thinking, oh no. Oh no, I've got these guys down here. But then we tasted it. And it just covered our tongue, and the flavors, it was so viscous and so caramely. The salt just resonated throughout. It was delicious. And it went down so easy. It was like no bourbon I'd ever had before. It really inspired me to see what else we could do with it. You know, where shall it go from here?
Hey, Max, I think we can build a cage for these barrels to ship them.
Okay.
So if you could weld something,
Trey is very much a visionary.
put a latch on it, or not a latch, put a hook on it.
He doesn't want to do the same old, same old, same old, same old. You know, he wants to do something different.
Today, we've got about 100 different experiments going on at all times.
So we've got one in Montana.
Trey has barrels all over the world, I think.
We've got one in Arkansas, which is in the Delta.
in mountains, they're in rivers.
Got one right off the Chesapeake.
There's one on a wagon on a ranch, just bouncing around the back of that wagon.
After I saw the transformation that the bourbon made when we put it on the ocean voyages, it made me think, why did bourbon proliferate in Kentucky and not elsewhere? I had a hypothesis that it was the route to market that whiskey took, changing it from whiskey to bourbon for the first time. So we decided to recreate that. I called it Jefferson's Journey. We floated 2 barrels down to New Orleans. It took us 58 days. Then we put it on ships, sent it down to Tampa, Key West, Fort Lauderdale, and finally hitchhiking up the East Coast to New York.
What happened to that whiskey on that voyage?
I tell you what, it turned out unbelievable. It was as dark as a 16-year-old that we double barreled. It was so easy drinking, turned out delicious.
The experiment took a full year to complete. We already knew that aging on the water had a material impact on the bourbon. But I wanted proof. So we sent it to a lab to break it down molecularly. And I got a 300-page document telling me exactly how it changes. I had a hard time making heads or tails of it.
This is Trey Zoeller with Jefferson's Bourbon. How we doing today?
I'm doing fine, thank you, Trey. This is Anthony from Geordie Labs. We received your sample and your control at the same time. We treated them the same, so the differences we are seeing. The main finding was that the whiskey that had been on the journey had more of these aromatic compounds, ester compounds, ketones, families of compounds that would generally be attributed to flavors and aromas.
Fantastic. Well, that just back.
When you take the barrels out of the control by changing the environment and the agitation of the maturation, you completely change the result and what you're going to get out of it.
You ready to get a barrel? Remy, you ready to get a barrel? Go get that barrel. These things smacking me in the face. Yeah.
You know, you've always got a little bit of trepidation when you go back to taste one of these experiments. You're building it up, you're talking about it, and, you know, you're with your buddies who are ripping you, saying this isn't going to do a damn thing, or this, you know, what a waste of effort. Then you go in there and you're wrestling around with that barrel, trying to get it just right before you're able to jockey it back onto the boat. When you're drilling into those barrels, you don't know what to expect. But when you start to see that color shooting out, and you can see that it just looks a little bit thicker than it used to be, and then when you try it, and you can tell that it's really morphed into something different, that's when you get a big smile on your face and like, all right, this is working.
Thank you all very much.
I'm one of the lucky people that absolutely loves what I do. I love the opportunity that it affords me to go to some incredible places and work with some incredible people. In a way, what I'm doing is self-serving. I'm trying to make great whiskey, but I'm trying to have a damn good time while I'm doing it.
Can you just taste what Jefferson's has up its sleeve in the future?
We'll kind of let that play out a little bit. I'll tell you what, I think Jonathan probably said it best. Everybody wants to live Trey's life over here.
I know Trey looked like such a badass in that opening scene, walking in camo and gun. You know, I was like, I know him. He ain't that
Smoke
cool.
and mirrors. Smoke and mirrors.
Well, that's
That was
awesome.
an outstanding video. I mean, yeah, I've watched it. This is probably my third time watching it now, and it's like it almost gives you like goosebumps and stuff just to see, like, you know, not only just how happy we are for you in the 25 years, but just how far bourbon's come for our state and everywhere, everyone that's been involved. And so I'm just happy that you've been a part of that and been an integral part of that, building this industry for every one of us to enjoy.
Well, thank you. And it really is 25 years that we've been in business. But the category's just taken such a metamorphosis. It's turned 180 degrees, and nobody would have ever guessed that we would have a podcast right now that has an audience that would like to see a video like this. That would have been, laughable at the time. So, man, yeah, it's a testament to what a great product it is and how great Kentucky is. And somehow, some way we've survived for 25 years, and it's been a lot of fun.
So does it still feel like work, or has it gotten a little bit easier now that bottles are starting to sell?
It's a hell of a lot easier when bottles are selling. As I've told Julian before, when you're just telling people no, and when I tell Dan Burke, our barrel officer, you don't know what selling's like right now. This is easy. This is just allocating things out right now. It's not how it used to be at all. But yeah, it makes it a lot more fun when they're selling.
I think that's probably give people a little bit of idea about what it was like a little bit early on. I mean, the video kind of talked about it and said that people just weren't drinking bourbon. And I know that we've talked about it on some of our past episodes that you've been on the podcast. I had mentioned something in the chat that if anybody had watched or want to get a little education, to make sure you go and check out episode 191. That was with you and your father, Chet, as well as the first one you were on with this was episode 63, which was way back in the day, back in 2016. So
repeat.
Yes.
How about it?
I know. And so kind of give folks a little bit of an idea of how difficult it was to sell whiskey back in those days.
It wasn't case sales, it was bottle sales. And outside of the Bourbon Belt, which would kind of correlate with the Bible Belt, people didn't drink bourbon. And it's really what gave me the idea to get into the bourbon category in the first place. Because growing up in Kentucky, we all drank bourbon. We never thought about it. I never thought about getting into the industry because it wasn't novel. It wasn't until I moved to a half dozen different places around the country that I saw people weren't drinking it and thought that there was opportunity. And then once I was dumb enough to get into the business, and I say dumb enough because, it was really difficult in the beginning. But it also allowed me the opportunity to get in. When you have a 25, 30-year decline, there's a great ocean of supply that's available that somebody like me could go to their friends here in Kentucky. There were only 8 distilleries at the time and purchase from them. But, I was couch surfing all over the country, staying at friends' house, trying to meet distributors. Actually, my first distributor outside of Kentucky, how I found him is I went to the Wine and Spirits Wholesalers Association out in San Francisco. And I didn't have money for a booth, so I literally rode the elevators and escalators with a briefcase and a bottle in it. And I was just trying to put it in anybody's face. And they hadn't seen any new bourbons in forever because nobody wanted it, would drink it. But they were still like a $50 bourbon. Are you crazy?
That reminds me, I think I listened to How I Built This. It might have been Michael Kors or somebody like that. It was somebody with shoes. And instead of actually going to the conference, what he did is he put a truck like out in front of I don't know, somewhere in downtown New York City. And as people were coming out of the conference, he got them to go in and try their shoes and stuff like that.
Yeah, I couldn't afford the badge to get in the conference, so it was on the peripheral. And I was treated like I was on the peripheral as well.
Yeah, I've heard stories of people just crashing like the bathrooms, of conferences to like meet and greet, like the who's who, just to because everybody's got to go to the bathroom,
Absolutely. And what happened is after that, when I would go spend time on my friends' couches, they would typically have a party for me, invite their friends so they could showcase the bourbon. And they'd have a bar and I'd put the bourbon on it and I would pour it. My friend would pour it. Everybody else would drink vodka or scotch or rum. It's still left. That wasn't very successful.
Now, think that you had so much good stuff back then too, and they were just like, I don't know, we'll just keep drinking gin and vodka.
Absolutely, that's what it was like. So, it's been a total fun ride. And just it's people, and I always tell people, when did bourbon really turn? It's when people had smartphones in their hand and they could go ahead and geek out on it and they could find out the information like you provide those guys. And it's something that you can really dig in on. And when that started happening, then it gave me the ability to kind of push the boundaries of what bourbon could be. Because at the time, everybody was, age and proof was really the only difference between bourbons. A little bit of recipes, but not much. And there was an audience that had a thirst for something new. And although we weren't always welcomed with some of the ideas that we did, eventually people came around to them.
So there's a good question kind of kick off this Q&A a little bit. Now, I think ocean is probably an obvious one. So taking ocean out of the equation here, John Willis wants to know, what's the most fun product that you put together over the years?
All the products that I collaborated with somebody, those are the ones that are a lot of fun because I'm collaborating with people that are outside of the industry. There's chef's collaboration. How that came about, Chef Edward Lee from here in town, he and myself and Dan Burke, who now works for us as our barrel officer, Matt Jamie, who's with Bourbon Barrel Foods, we were just out and about on the town and had a pretty big afternoon, evening, and went to 610 Magnolia for dinner afterwards. And Dan was in the wine business at the time, and he brought some bottles of wine in, and he said, Edward, what wine or what food should we pair with this wine that I brought? And it's like, Edward, I'm going to continue to drink bourbon. What food would pair with the bourbon? And he started talking about it. And then he's like, you know what, Trey? We should come up with a bourbon that pairs with different foods. And so I was forced into having to go meet with him about 7 times over the next 3 months.
That's gotta be terrible to go have great food and drink bourbon. I mean, it's part of the job. That's what people don't realize. It is still his work at the end of the day.
From a top chef candidate.
Work. Yeah. And Edward's a blast. So, we tried to pair it specifically with his Korean fried chicken, which is out of the world. And we're trying to get enough spice to hold up to it. So, yeah, that was one of the great ones. Some of the people that I've met, like the Chapelets, where we finish in their Pritchard Hill cast finish, Cabernet barrels out of Napa. We've become excellent friends. And, that's what this industry is all about. You guys, it's great to be able to hang out with people that, that you've looked up to, that you've met, that you love how they're pushing it in different directions. And there's not a lot of industries that you can do that in. Makes it a lot of fun.
I got another question for you. Sort of when you started the brand and you were trying to put together your first product, how did you sort of figure out what's my blend going to be, or how am I going to differentiate it? Because you had mentioned you're buying barrels from the 8 distilleries that were here, and it's easy to probably just go and pick out one or a couple hundred good barrels from one distillery, bottle it, and put it together. But then it would just be like something else out there. What was your kind of thought process going into just trying to enter the market, especially as something that you said, especially in the video, entering the premium side of bourbon market when nobody really wanted it either?
Right. A $50 bottle of bourbon was very premium at the time, and super, ultra super premium. When I started blending together, it's really, I knew about wine blenders, and I knew enough to be dangerous about Scotch. Like at Macallan, the whiskey maker, above the blender's door, it says whiskey maker. Above the production manager or the distiller, it says production manager. So as everybody that I was buying from was talking about, 65 to 80% of what bourbon is comes from the maturation process. So people were maturing it the same way. And I also started looking at those blenders and saying, wait a second, if I looked at these, and people didn't talk about blending in whiskey at the time because that was associated with blended Scotch whiskeys where you could add GNS or caramel coloring or anything like that. So 2 things happened. 1, I knew about that. 2, I was buying kind of small lots of bourbon at a time. And to be able to bring those bourbons together, I started playing around with the different sample bottles that I had. And I was like, ooh, by putting these two together, I'm getting so much more flavor compacted throughout the tasting experience. I was like, well, that's novel. I don't know anybody else doing this in the industry. And it's really going to give it a different taste, different mouthfeel, everything. So, it's kind of looking outside of the industry again to come up for the inspiration to do it.
Talk about the modern day Jeffersons. How many different mash bills are you playing with, to create, the standard offerings versus the limited editions and whatnot? What kind of, I guess, sandbox are you playing in these days?
Well, so as Ryan, I know we do three things. We contract distill, which we've been doing for generations, meaning that I have big distilleries here in Kentucky making a recipe either specific to me or barrel specific to me, that I've got in my, I've got a number of those in my arsenal. We're also part owners of Kentucky Artisan Distillery. We take about 90% of the distillate coming off that. So we've got actually two different recipes coming from there that we utilize. And then I'm still to this day able to source from time to time. So I'm able to get different distillate from different distilleries as well.
We're going to need that contact.
Excuse me?
I'm going to need that contact. You can still source
You got
stuff.
it. Yeah. But that being said, like when I blend our Jefferson's Reserve together, I'm using typically 4 different bourbons, one of which comprises about 65% of the total. And the other 3 are continuously changing. So I've got a control that I'm always tasting against, and I'm trying to get it as close to that control as possible. However, if I like one a little bit better than the one that's closest to that, I'll use it for that batch. The next batch, I'm going back and trying to get as close to it as possible. So that directionally keeps it in line, but it also gives the flexibility that each batch is going to be a little bit different. So that's one of the reasons that that we haven't built or bought a distillery to this point, is because one, I know our source. I've been working with these sources for a long time. I know the consistency that they can provide. You just can't build a distillery and turn it on and think you're going to get great juice right out of the bat. It takes time and it takes know-how. And, that know-how is spread very thin these days because there's been so many distilleries that have come up. So that's something that gives you a little bit of trepidation, and, it's easy to fall back on to what you're very comfortable with. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered your question or not.
No, totally. And that's, too, what I think is most exciting about, Jefferson's and, too, I think the future of bourbon is the blending, and you're kind of one of the pioneers of that in the industry, because you're not just stuck to one mash bill on 6 different tiers on a different location and have 100 different brands, with the same recipe and whatnot. It's every batch is unique and interesting. And that's what I think the future of bourbon. Well, it's already there because you've already brought it, but I think more and more that's going to be a growing category, I guess, in this space.
And I think it really is. Blending is taking great distillate and hopefully making it better. And actually, that's what we're trying to do with it all. And I've been lucky enough to have 25 years of relationships that I've been buying from a number of different sources for so long, and now distilling ourselves where we can be very flexible as well. So that gives me a lot of options. And I kind of refer to it as spice racks. I've got different barrels. It's not only the distillate, it's the barrels that make a big difference, obviously, as well. So as we were talking about it, why are we so limited in bourbon when there's only 4 levels of char, when in actuality, for the most part, it's 90%, char 3 and 4. So, that's pretty narrow. But if you open that up, there's a lot of different things you can do with it.
Yeah. So there's a good question here about Dan K from Chicago, a good friend of ours over here. And so he kind of said, when a lot of people started getting into bourbon, your bourbon probably not getting into bourbon in the common sense, probably, or modern sense, probably a long time ago, that it would probably sit on the shelves being quote unquote too expensive. But now that the market has shifted, and higher sticker prices are pretty common now. Is Jefferson's have a plan to start making that relationship more synonymous with today's SRP pricing?
No, you know what? We're keeping it pretty consistent. If you look at where we started with our very small batch at $29.99, we're typically $35 somewhere around that for our VSB today, 25 years later, which is pretty amazing. Our Jefferson's Reserve, we debuted it at $49.99. It's within $10 of that in most places now. Now, some of our, like our Ocean, Pritchard Hill, cast finish, things that, take a little bit more to really work with it. And that cost we've got to pass on, then we bring that price up. But I think if you look at us across 25 years, we might have been a little bit expensive at the beginning, but I think that our prices are, for what we offer right now, are incredible values. And, we do have, some higher offerings. So there's, our 17-year-old right now that on the secondary market goes for thousands, but we couldn't give it away at $100, years ago when we debuted it. But, now you've got such supply and demand. I want to be fair to people, but I also think that we should be able to take some money off the table.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a good balance of figuring out like where do we need to be, and I think that you had mentioned started the premiumization route and going with the $50 bottle. Today, 50 is the new 20. That's pretty much what it is. I think that people have gotten used to it, but you all have been able to kind of stick to your guns. You know exactly what you're at, and I think that it fits the category right there, and it's the category's kind of grown with you. I think we were talking about it yesterday for multiple times that said you were just ahead of your time for a lot of these things.
Like these right here?
That's right. Those energy drinks.
It's another inside joke for people that didn't know that Trey actually started an energy drink when bourbon wasn't doing so hot as well. It's called
in
Pink
Australia.
Energy. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
right.
You'll have to wait for the podcast to hear more about that one.
Ryan would not let that one alone. Pink energy drink, Trey? Okay.
Man, I was just fascinated by that. I got to try it. Who cares about that 17-year? I want to try the pink.
There you go. Yeah. It went the way of the dodo bird. So this is the only can that I know that's in existence, and it leaked out. It's empty. So
it's just like
you'll never have the pleasure.
Just like that. Speaking of that 17-year, Tim actually wants to know where to get her hands on what appears to be that 17-year-old that Trey's drinking right there.
That's a good question.
Facebook.
In a private group.
Yeah, you gotta find somebody that knows somebody that bought a bourbon a long, long time ago that is sitting on some of those bottles right there. You want to kind of tell a little bit of the story about that one there, Trey?
Yeah, this was, actually one of these things that came up as I was building relationships throughout the years with different distillers. It actually wasn't distillers. It was people who owned the distilleries at the time. And they would have somebody in procurement that would go through, last about 2 years, go from, one job to the next. And so you're continuously fostering these relationships. And one of the guys that was in charge of the Stitzel-Weller inventory, when he was moving on, I think he was actually moving to Napa to run their wine portfolio. He called me up and said, Trey, I've got 400 barrels left from the original juice at Stitzel-Weller. Weeded recipe. We all knew where that would be going if it wasn't going to myself. He's like, do you want it? And as excited as I was to get it, and I did try to have a little poker face and not get too excited and say, well, send me some samples and pricing. We bought it, and that was a big purchase at the time. 400 barrels. I did buy it for less than one of my sales guys paid for one pour not too long ago. So that's a pretty good indication of where the category's gone. But that was a pretty big purchase at the time, and we priced it at $99.99 a bottle, and it didn't sell out like that. We had to go out there and hustle it.
Yeah. What was the feedback like when you're trying to sell that $100 price tag? What would people say? Like
$100? Are you kidding me? for a bottle of bourbon, $100? You got to be kidding me. All right, I might try a case. Okay, we'll take a case then. That's basically what it was. And then people started to catch on and taste it. And then they said, well, wait a second. The Stitzel, And we did. We bottled it up as a 17, an 18, and a 20. And I think myself and a number of other people think it reached its apex at 17 years. So it's a great indication of how almost every bourbon does have an apex. And it's a fine line between going over that and getting diminishing returns.
Dang, I got an 18-year-old. I got shorted.
Poor thing.
Come on over. Next time you're
Yeah.
here, we'll go ahead and break into this.
Yeah, bring it over the fire pit.
So there's a lot of questions about. We looked in the video, and there is so much stuff about talking about experimentations in different places. So there's two questions that came up. First, Tim asked, "How did the swamp sample taste?" Right, because we saw that barrel that was just kind of sitting in the middle of the swamp there.
In the cattails.
Yeah.
Unbelievably, it aged much more rapidly than it would in a warehouse in Kentucky. So it was a hot, humid climate, and that accentuation of heat made it much darker than you would find here in Kentucky, and gave
Was it in Louisiana by chance, or where was it at?
It was in Virginia. Actually.
Okay.
So,
So
And
if
it
you're
was
in
literally
Virginia,
just
start
sitting out there in a
in a swamp.
well, it wasn't quite a swamp, but it's out there, and yeah, it was, and that was a. I really think the terroir of bourbon isn't so much of where a grain is grown, because I think by the time you get it up to 160, if you're distilling it up there, at that proof, you distill a lot of that out. However, in the maturation process, the environment, is I've seen time and time again with the ocean voyages, with our Jefferson journey, it really plays an impact. So where's that? Where's the best place to age it? Is it Kentucky? A lot
Hard to
of
tell
people think
now.
so. Yeah. So
Apparently, it's on a boat. That's got to be the best place.
tell you what, there was a lot of people on the East Coast that would pay a lot more money from the whiskey coming from Kentucky that went on a boat down the rivers to New Orleans and on a ship around Florida and back up, when there was whiskey readily available all over the damn place. And if you ask me, and while we reincarnated that Jefferson's journey trip, it was to show that the reason that bourbon proliferated in Kentucky, and it's the reason that whiskey turned into bourbon for the first time, was putting in those barrels and the route that it took up to New York, Boston, Philadelphia, that area.
Where was that? Did that ever get bottled and released? That
It
because I knew
did.
that it did. Okay,
It was like
Yeah.
it was like almost like a sampler pack. It looked like, if I remember
that's
correctly.
right.
You got
Yeah.
it. Had two 200 milliliter bottles. One was distilled and aged in Kentucky. One was distilled on the same date. We distilled it in January, waited until the spring floods would have subsided, and took off actually June 7th, and landed in New York a year to the date that we took off.
So there's another question from Chris here that says, with all the experiments that you have going on, have you ever had one that you thought would turn out well, but then you tasted it and you said, well, maybe not so much?
Yeah. So I fell in love with Tabasco and Avery Island and the process, and the fact that only employees can live there. And there's 6, 7 generation employees that live on Avery Island and make Tabasco. They've got a fermentation process. They age in barrels, age in used bourbon barrels. It's a very, very similar process. And I got a hold of 2 barrels that held bourbon for 4 years and Tabasco for no less than 40 years. And it's like, oh my gosh, I got to try this out.
I had no idea that there was this much that went in Tabasco, by the way. So you're schooling me on something over here.
Tabasco takes about 5 years from the time you plant it to the time it gets into the bottle. Blew me away. Had no clue. And if you ever get a chance, it is one of the coolest places in the United States. It's about 2 hours southwest of New Orleans, and great people. But they sent up 2 barrels to me that they knew that these barrels were at least 40 years old. They cooper them on site, so they were able to maintain the integrity of them. But they sent it up to me. By the time I dumped, I put 8-year-old bourbon in it. and it seeped right through. We captured it into a tank, poured it back in, seeped through again. By the third time, it had absorbed enough and swollen enough that it would go ahead and hold it. Just the stuff that had run through there would blow your head off. I mean,
Like that spicy. Just I'm trying to think on the BT. I'm thinking of when I watch Hot Ones, like how many BTUs we're getting up here or whatever that
next time
that
you're
marker
over,
is.
we'll try it. And so I tried to dilute it down to 8 parts regular bourbon, one that had been in the barrel, and still at that point, it's sting the hell out of your lips and your tongue. And that was just one of many experiments that I've had that failed. When I started doing our experimental collection, which would have been back in 2012, where I had 13 different experiments with all different types of, putting it in, taking 4-year-old whiskey and putting it in new French barrels or French oak with American heads, French oak American heads with staves that have been seared or slow cooked. 4 different variables on most of these. And I would try them every 30 days for 36 months. One of them after 60 days tastes like a butterscotch bomb, like a Werther's candy. It was delicious. I'm like, man, this is good at 60 days. I can't wait. 90 days, it's going to be incredible. You know the answer.
Yes,
Totally
We know this.
turned.
We know this story. We know how that
Yes.
ends.
Totally turned, tastes like green wood. Which it was a very, it was a great learning moment. It's, when you're finishing, you've got to be on these barrels all the time. And then once you get a formula down, it's not like it's going to repeat the next year. Because if you put it in the barrel in November versus May, totally different seasons and totally different ways that the bourbon interacts with it.
Yeah, I've learned that lesson myself, where it's like, oh, it's tasted great, and then you wait a week, and I was like, what the hell happened? It's like shit.
Wait, is it me or did this
Yeah.
turn?
I was like, I promise, Kenny, it was good a week ago.
I don't believe it.
You
There's a
you
good
got to get it
question.
out by that time.
Yeah. There's a good question here from Christina, and she says, talking about your barrel, you have your wave stave, which is going to your twin oak. She said, can you talk about any future experiments that you have going on with that?
Wave staves are great because they give you twice as much surface area, but wave staves are something that you've really got to be on because it gives a lot of influence very quickly. But there's a lot that you can do with it. So that barrel, that was a proprietary barrel we made with Independent Stave Company that was extra seasoned, then grooved out, put a flash char on it, and then we toasted it at a certain level to bring out mocha flavors. And so again, we put 8-year-old bourbon at the time into that. That was a 4-month finish that I tried it. It was one December night that we went out, and actually Steve Thompson, the guy who put Kentucky Artisan Distillery together, we were out with a couple guys and Steve, and we went to taste it, and he tasted it in classic Steve fashion. He said, I don't buy into all that marketing bullshit, but this is the best bourbon I've ever had. I want to be buried with this bourbon. And so literally we got on the phone to Jade and said, let's get that stuff out of the barrels in the morning. And it did Pinnacle. But yeah, that's the great thing to me. There's lots of ways to push bourbon in different directions based on what you do with a barrel. And there's a ton of different finishings going on now, and there's more experiments going on, but there's still room out there. And there's rooms in other ways that I've got some, I think, really interesting experiments going on that we're going to be putting in a bottle about a year from now. I've got one that I think is going to be totally different than anything that's been out there.
There you go. There's a little foreshadowing for you there, Tim. So probably can't talk about anything yet, but there's a little nod for something to be paying attention to.
I just saw any new finishes. We are going to be coming out with something in tribute to our 25 years in business, which in this case, it's not really a finish, but yeah, I think it's going to be one hell of a blend that we're doing for the 25th anniversary, and a great tribute to something that really makes sense. So, yeah, unfortunately, these won't be out until the end of this calendar year. We can thank our supply chain for that. But it is
The
coming.
glass bug hit you as well.
There you go.
Yep. How weird. How weird.
Yeah, it's in this glass bottle opposed to this one, and it's taking a little while.
Yeah. So there's a few more questions on here, and I think before we kind of get into that, we should probably talk about ocean, because I think that's, in my opinion, it's one of the big feathers in your cap. This is something that was a novel idea. Maybe people at first are like, "Oh, Trey, come on, this is a gimmick." But when you watch that video, you really see it, and you're like, "Holy crap!" And I think to probably even kind of set the stage with it more, we were with Trey yesterday, and he showed us the picture. If you want to try to pull it up to the screen, you showed us the picture of what it looked like, 3 years on the ocean. And when Fred had said in that video, did like this rust out with a nail or something like that?
Yeah, it looked like a quart
inside
of
there.
oil.
Yeah. So part of this also wants to go and kind of just talk about ocean just a little bit, because there you go. So if anybody that, I'll see if I can put that large screen for you there. But yeah, that's dark. That's super dark.
That's
So
dark. Yeah.
yeah.
That and so it was on the water, and that was the only voyage that we did as new fill. So I put I put 5 new fill barrels on a ship, and it was gone for 3.5 years. It was originally going to different ports of call. That this is really one of the main reasons I did it, is because I wanted to go join that boat in these different ports of call and have an excuse for it, have a write-off for it, to go taste it along the way. Unfortunately for me, the expedition changed. It went out to an uninhibited island chain called the Guadalupe Islands that are 1,200 nautical miles southwest of San Diego. So it bounced around in that heat for 3.5 years. When the ship came back to Key West, I took 3 journalists without ever trying it down there. And when we tapped into it and I saw that color coming out and that thickness on it, I was like, oh,
This is
Right.
old shit.
somebody
Yeah.
from the New York Times, from Esquire, and from Men's Health. I'm like, oh, well, it didn't turn out, and then we tasted it and we were like, wow. And right away, one of the guys said, this is like 3 different spirits in one. And the sugars caramelize in the wood. So it gives it a real caramely taste that gives it a lot of texture as well, a lot of weight to it. So he said it's like a dark rum because of that. Then the sea air permeates the barrel. So you get that brininess like a malt. So it's like a single malt out on the coast, and it's a bourbon at heart. I'm like, I got something. Now I've got to figure out how to commercialize it. So today we age it for 6 to 8 years, put it on ships, and it goes out to 30 ports on 5 continents, crossing the equator 4 times before coming back. And we've now got really 4 different expressions of it. We've got our regular ocean, which is a rye bourbon. We've got our cast strength version of that. We've got a weeded version. And I'm not sure if I can release what we're just about to put out. Can we put that out yet?
He's getting the hook.
Can we talk about what we're just about to put out? It's on shelves. It's supposed to be. It's hitting shelves right now.
Okay. Wait for the press release. We'll get to you on This Week in Bourbon here soon. Yeah. But that was funny because Nathan asked, well, why is it ocean so black and as dark as these days as that first voyage? But that probably just is because it didn't spend 3 years out there.
Right. And that was a cast strength as well. So it wasn't 3.5 years, one cast strength. The last one that we did, and there's really almost a fifth, our voyage 24 was the only voyage that we tried to recreate the heat of the first one. So it just figurated through the Caribbean islands down to Panama and back a number of times. So that was all heat all the time. And it's great. We've got all the data from it, average 93 degrees. And it's dark and it's rich and it's got a ton of weight on it. Very viscous.
So do you have a favorite route that you like for your ocean barrels?
Well, I'll tell you what, I was really happy with the way that one came out.
Yeah.
The other ones, they go on the same route, all the way down around into the Tasmanian Sea, up into the North Sea and crossing the equator 4 times. So, they're really all over the place. And depending what named storms it hits, or you're almost in the northern and southern hemisphere about the same time. So in theory, it shouldn't matter what time of year you take off, but each voyage gives gives a specific taste to it.
I really like Tim's question here is that will there be a stuck at port batch for Oceans here in the future?
Well, there could be.
It's there with the glass right now.
We did get stuck at port with that Voyage 24 for a few weeks because the crew got COVID. So we could have come out with a COVID release on that. We also got stuck in the Panama Canal one time when we had a leaker. So we now have absorbing kind of an absorption, not towels, but basically blankets on the bottom to absorb in case that happens again. But hopefully we won't have any more stuck at sea. That would be a shame.
Right. That's what Christina also asked about. Any idea about finishing an Oceans in a rum cask or something like that? Even though you already have a rum cask finish, but hey, why not
It's one
just
of my
take everything
favorite.
an extra step?
Well, that's a great teaser to.
Oh, did she
She
just hit the
figured it
nail on the
out.
head? Did she? She must have already seen it on shelves, and maybe that's
She's
what
got
it
a
is.
gun in her photo. They've been
That's
hunting
not
together.
the one that's on shelves, but yeah.
We'll leave it at that. We'll leave it at that.
So Trey, one thing I've kind of appreciate about you and like all your offerings, a lot of the whiskey geeks, they really like strive for barrel proof or cask strength, but you kind of like say no. I think whiskey has its perfect proof, and it's not always cask strength. Kind of talk about your philosophy about that.
And I think this is one that not a lot of people agree with, but I do. I think there's a pinnacle again with this where astringency overtakes flavor at some point, and I try to get the most flavor that I can out of it to enjoy it. The only cask strength that we've done to date is in the ocean, and because that constant contact with the wood, you're replacing, you're getting a lot of flavors from the wood, and you're also, that wood acts as a filter and takes out the astringency of it. So I think it has a lot more flavor and a lot less astringency than you would get on most cask strengths. That's where I like it. I don't sit down and typically have one bourbon. It's usually more than that. And after I have one bourbon at cask strength, I don't have a lot left here. So that's kind of my
Yeah,
philosophy.
you have long nights, so you got to make it a marathon.
You gotta make it last.
Exactly.
Can't be just drinking cask strength all night.
And this is how I drink bourbon. When I'm tasting it, I'm batching, I drink it neat, but most of the time, Big Rock is how I drink it. And after doing it for 25 years, I think it goes down like iced tea. So that might be another reason to keep it in check for me.
That's right.
Yeah. Too much of a good thing.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
there's one last question here, and this is kind of dealing with the business side of thing. This is coming from Aura, and he says, aside from the supply chain not catching up to demand, what do you think has been the biggest challenge in scaling and growing your brand?
We've been fortunate. Certainly the easy one is capital. That's the hardest one. We have been purchased by Pernod Ricard, which is affording us a lot of resources, which takes care of a lot of those issues that we've had previously. I think any small business, you're undercapitalized almost every time. And as Fred and I've talked about, in the early days, nobody would lend you money to buy bourbon or to strike out with a brand. That was not a winning combination.
That's still the case now.
Well, it's a lot easier than it was. That's for sure. People will listen to you now, at least. When you have success of a product, if it's a finishing or, so you're taking gambles and you're bottling up so many barrels and that takes off. Ocean's a great example. We had 5 barrels. There were actually only 3 barrels that made it. 2 of the barrels, the band supposedly corroded and burst. So we had that first Ocean. It was great. We had
I
this much
remember that
volume.
story. Yeah, you're just kind of like, I really don't know if they were actually corroded and burst, but
Or the crew got a little
yeah, the crew
frisky.
got a
Right.
little taste of
I think the
something.
crew probably got it. But okay, now I've got to replicate that. I've got to find, go through all the legal um, hoops and hurdles. And then, it takes a long time to get those barrels out and find a ship that'll take it, around the world. No problem. I can get it back to you in 45 days. Whoa, we want time. So I've got to find, the right partner to do that with. And then it's gone for 8 months before. So you have success with that brand. It was 2 years later before we came out with Voyage 2.
Yeah. Well, that's
So-
awesome. So we're going to start wrapping it up here. And I kind of just got one last question for you. There's been a few in the chat that have been pretty good. Somebody just asked, is there going to be a Jefferson's and Bourbon Pursuit collab? But we just selected 2 barrels of Jefferson's a few weeks ago. So
I'm still wanting to do a blending collab. We do a blend off, me and you.
You got it. Head to head. We can try it.
That's
do
right.
it.
You'll kick my
That'd
ass.
be a lot of fun, actually.
It would be fun.
Actually, here's a good one for Christina. Because you talked about Jefferson's journey. You talked about that in the video a lot. Any more about that particularly coming in the future?
I think
more
Christina knows that's already coming out.
Yeah, she's already
Does
got
she have
like
a
the
crystal
inside
ball?
scoop. Is
She
this
have
is this like your niece or something like that that we don't know about? She's just like tossing us softballs.
No, but my nephew did jump on there and say something, which I was glad to see. Yeah. Hopefully he's at the fraternity house drinking a little Jefferson bourbon and toasting us. Yeah, that's one that we do have plans for. That's in essence the whole history of Kentucky and why bourbon's proliferated here and why towns like Owensboro and Maysville popped up in the first place. So the history of that is just so, I think, important. And it's something that we've started and stopped a number of times for one reason or another, but might be a great place to kick that off at the Fraser Museum, right off Main Street onto a barge right as you're getting down there. We may have had those discussions a time or two.
Well, there's another question. It's too far to scroll up now, but somebody had actually asked to say, can you have essentially a bonded warehouse on an ocean? How does that work from a legality standpoint?
Well, it's all in bonded areas. And then once it leaves port, then that's a different story.
As long as Somali pirates don't take it, then we're okay. Is that
we
what the
don't
idea
go?
is?
We hit 5 continents. We don't hit Africa. But yeah, that was a long process to figure out. And people, when you say you want to export something and then import it without taking it off the ship, hold on a second. You're either smuggling drugs or you're laundering money. I just don't get what's going on. So no, it's a quick knee-jerk reaction. So that was a long, expensive process.
Gosh, I can imagine just dealing with the government on like traditional bourbon offerings takes forever. So I can imagine something that, wild and crazy. It'd probably just be like, let me talk to my manager and get back to you.
Yeah,
Never.
Right. It's if they haven't done it before, the typical answer is no. But when at the end of the day, TTB is really there to protect the consumer. And when they find out that you're enhancing something and not cheating it, and they're getting their tax dollars, which they get more of because we've got to pay it up front, then logic wins out.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So, but yeah, it wasn't easy.
Well, Trey, I want to say thank you again for coming on here tonight, and thank you everybody else that was here to ask your questions and kind of be a part of this live Q&A. I just want to say cheers to you. Thank you for the path that you've carved. Congratulations on 25 years. It's a huge milestone, and I think you deserve. I'm so glad now that you really hustled the first few years, and now it's all paid off, and now cases are just selling, right? It's not bottle sales. It's now container sales. So it's really awesome to be able to see this journey and the way that you've been able to kind of carve the path. And I think it's really I'm very happy we're able to kind of bring you on and share your story of kind of one of the great unsung heroes of really what it's like to sort of really kind of like grind it from the bottom and kind of see how this can go from somebody that just passionate about bourbon, didn't own a distillery, didn't have a generations of distilling history to lean back on. It's just somebody that was just really passionate about bourbon. You wanted to start and create something. So this is a fantastic educational thing for anybody out there that just wants to know more about you and the brand.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for you and what you all do. I mean, it's you all have created one hell of a thirsty audience, and you keep providing them, more and more information. And that's what's made bourbon proliferate the way that it has. It's information, because there's as much bullshit as there is in every industry, there's real meat in this, and you all give it to them, which is amazing. Love what you all do. And no, I'm not near done. We've got a global reach that bourbon hasn't scratched the surface. I kind of have this thing against Scotch. We're the better product.
Just a little itch to
Us,
scratch
all of us.
there.
We're more expensive to make than they are. This is a better product at the end of the day. And there's a whole world out there that doesn't know anything about it. So
This is just the
I'll put it
beginning, is what
on.
you're trying to say.
You got it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just want to second what Kenny said. Trey, you've been a huge inspiration to us, and you've always been supportive of us. And I'm just so happy for you, and congratulations. You should be super proud of everything you've done. And I've enjoyed all the times we've been able to spend together. And I just, every time I see you, I just open up my ears and just try to listen and learn so much from you. You have so much to add to us and to this industry. And just want to thank you for all that, the time you've taken to spend with us and whatnot. So
Thank you. I love hanging out with you guys, and you learn from your mistakes. And Lord knows I've had oodles and oodles of those. So
failing forward, right?
you got it. Falling forward.
Last question, Trey. Can you recommend any good lawn
Yeah,
guys? in
that's right.
Louisville?
Absolutely, I can.
Not go green.
You got it. Go green. Go
I
green.
love it.
For sure.
Well, thanks, Chris, for that last question there. But cheers, everybody. Thank you again for sticking with us, and keep listening. By the way, if you want to learn more about Trey and his father, Chet, make sure you go and check out our episode 63. It was the first one that Trey was on. We kind of talked about just the origination of Jefferson's. And I think that was the first one we actually asked, like, why'd you call it Jefferson? So if you want to know the history, go there. And then as well as episode 191, it's called Blending Your Way to a Brand with Trey and Chet Zoeller of Jefferson's. And go ahead and give a plug for the book there, Trey. Too.
There you go. My dad's book. He's on his 5th edition. It is the encyclopedia of distilleries in Kentucky. It's not going to keep you up at night. It's not the most exciting read, but it's the Bible.
There you go. I think you were talking about it earlier. It's just he collected all the receipts and everything from eons and decades and kind of was able to piece together a story there.
You got it. Decades of research went into that. So really proud of him.
So go check that out. But cheers, everybody. Thank you so much for joining the stream. And make sure you go check out the episodes that we had with Trey on the show. And you can also look forward to another episode here in probably, I think another few more months. We'll have some more fun things we'll be talking about with Trey. So
loving him.
Yep. Cheers, everyone. Bye.
Ryan, Kenny, thank you.
Yep. See you, bud.
A lot of fun.